Stamford. How's everyone doing? Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. What an amazing turnout. I think we have over 1,000 people in this room. So big round of applause for all of you. Thank you for coming out at this moment when there is so much at stake for our city, for our state, for our country, and for our democracy. I want to start by thanking there's a few people that were instrumental in making this happen. The custodial team and AV staff at West Hill. Big round of applause. And another round of applause for our Stamford Police Department for keeping us safe and being here tonight. So the past 67 days, hard to believe it's only been 67 days, of the Trump administration have been just devastating, upsetting, heart-wrenching for all of us who love our country and who hold the values of our democracy dear and cherish what it means to be an American. And I know that it's caused a range of emotions in all of us, from what the Trump administration is doing to target immigrants and roll back civil rights and LGBTQ rights, and to target DEI and climate and gut social service programs and attack the institutions that we hold dear. And all of this has been gut-wrenching. But what gives me hope and optimism is the fact that we've got a packed room here tonight of people who are not willing to stand down, who are speaking out, who are refusing to stay silent. I know as your mayor, I'm not going to be silent, and we're going to stand up to this madness and chaos. And I know that I couldn't be more proud, grateful, and honored to have one of the most exceptional leaders in our country right now. And so honored to get to introduce him tonight. Senator Chris Murphy has been on the front lines, a leading national voice challenging the Trump administration's draconian actions, and he's been successful in blocking a lot of the madness. He has been across the country challenging the lawlessness, challenging the chaos, standing up for what is right, and he's done this his whole career. Senator Murphy has always been a champion for Connecticut families, standing up for our healthcare rights, standing up against gun violence, and defending our democracy at home and abroad. And I couldn't be more grateful that he's here with us tonight. I know we couldn't be more proud to have you as our senator. Thank you so much. Let's give Senator Murphy a warm Stamford welcome.
Hey, everybody. Make sure this is working. I'll take yours. How about that? All right. First of all, you have an exceptional mayor. This is one of the best run cities in the country. A growing city under her watch, a growing family under her watch. Caroline has a lot going on, but we're very lucky to have her running Stamford. Give Mayor Caroline Simmons another round of applause. So listen, this is democracy, right? This is why we feel so proud, so good, so lucky to live in this country, because even at a moment of grave peril, we have the opportunity to say no. We have the opportunity to stand together, to turn out, and to say as loudly as possible that the United States bows to no king, right? This is a country worth fighting for, and I just want to hammer this home to start, and I want to get into the threat, and I want to give you a sense of the way out, and then I want to take your questions. This evening is really about you and getting your concerns aired and hopefully getting some of your questions answered. But it is worth stating at the outset, that we do live in a country, in a civilization that is exceptional. There was this popular meme maybe 10, 15 years ago to kind of suggest that there was too much hubris involved in making the claim that America was better or different. But it is just true that in the history of this planet, never before has a civilization done for as long as we have done what we have done, right? What did we decide to do? We decided to build a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multiracial society in which you get to retain, right, part of that identity, but that you are also part of something big, something whole, something in which we respect our differences, we celebrate our differences, and we get stronger because of our differences. And we just, right, that's exceptional. We are not the same as each other. We are different from each other, but we are all the same because we belong to a nation in which we have made a second big bet. We have decided to determine the laws that govern us ourselves, right? And that feels normal to us, having lived in no other civilization. Many of you maybe have come from other countries in which you did not have that right or privilege, but for those of us who were born in the United States of America, maybe we accept that as normal. It is not. 0.0001% of all humans have ever lived in a country, a civilization, a society in which their vote determines the rules, in which there is no king or monarch or despot who decides for you. For 250 years, 250 years, a quarter millennia, we have been able to hold together maybe the greatest experiment in the history of civilization, a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-religious democracy, right? It is a miracle what we have done. We have always been imperfect. We are always self-improving. We are never done. But at a moment when I know you wake up and you feel anxious, and you don't know what's next, and you feel scared to turn on the news, right? Just remember the country that you live in. Just remember how exceptional this is. And so maybe I'll end by talking about this, but that's how I feel every day. That's how I feel. I feel privileged to live in this country, and I feel damn privileged to be the United States Senator representing the state of Connecticut, the state that I grew up in, my parents grew up, my grandparents grew up, and I feel a sense of privilege. But let's not make any mistake. The threat is huge. The threat is huge. It really is. And there are two connected stories that are playing out right now. The first and most important story is the attempt to essentially transition America to an oligarchy, right? To a country where only a handful of rich, moneyed, connected elites rule. And they organize government effectively to steal from the people. That we just become a mechanism, a means to make the very powerful and the very rich who have access to power more powerful and even richer. And so you see that playing out both in formal ways and in informal ways. It is not a coincidence, for instance, that when Elon Musk was handed the keys to the White House, that he went first after the agencies that stood in the way of his business interests. He went first after the National Labor Relations Board, where there were multiple complaints against his agency. He went to the NTSB, and then he went specifically to the agency within NTSB that was standing in the way of him more quickly rolling out his self-driving cars. Even USAID was not a coincidence. Who celebrates more than anybody else when USAID is shuttered? It's China. Where does Elon Musk make most of his cars? In China. What's his second biggest supplier base? What's his second biggest market outside of the United States? It's China. And so in all of these informal mechanisms, you see the oligarchs, the powerful in charge of this new government, using their access in order to enrich themselves. But then in the more formal legislating, the same thing is happening. What we are right now fighting inside Senate is something called a budget resolution. This is the one chance that the majority party gets every year to pass something with a majority vote. They can do it without any members of the minority parties. They can pass this without any Democrats. And what are they doing? They are proposing essentially, the biggest, most massive transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the rich in the history of the country. Now, in 2017, when they did this same thing, when they controlled, Republicans and Trump controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate, they did a big tax cut for the wealthy, fully implemented. That bill would have put about 80% of the tax cuts to the richest 1%. But they borrowed all the money for it. So they put all the money on our credit card. That was a bad decision. Ultimately, we'll have to pay that money back. This time, they're doing it differently. Same tax cut, loaded up with benefits for the very, very wealthy. $1 trillion of this tax cut go to the richest 1% again. But this time, they're not borrowing the money. This time, they are going to do a real-time transfer from you, from us, from the poorest and most vulnerable members of our community to the wealthy, because they are proposing essentially a one-for-one swap. They're going to do $1.1 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest 1%, and they're going to pay for it with $1.1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, which is the program that insures 24% of Americans. You don't maybe know it as Medicaid in Connecticut. Nobody actually knows it as Medicaid. In Connecticut, it's the Husky program. And devastating cuts to food stamps, the program that provides food assistance mainly to children, but to low-income families as well. And so the theft, right, that is the definition of an oligarchy, is happening in informal ways and in formal ways, and it threatens to remake the country. But that's super unpopular, right? Nobody signed up for a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class and the poor to the wealthy. Nobody wants Elon Musk rooting around in government in order to benefit his businesses. And so how do you get away with that? How do you get away with doing something that is deeply unpopular? Well, you try to crush dissent, right? You try to destroy the accountability structure. And so there isn't two stories, right? There isn't one story about the corruption inside government and the takeover by Elon Musk, and then this story about the destruction of democracy. It's all the same story. It's all the same story. The destruction of democracy, the attempt to try to rig elections or destroy the opposition, it is connected in to the attempt to hand over the government to the elites, because you can't get away with that if people have the right to stand up and protest. And so I am deeply worried every single day about the things that are happening to our democracy, whether it be the first most unconscionable act, the endorsement of political violence at scale, right? The idea that if you commit violence in the name of President Trump, you will never pay a price for it, the pardoning of all of those protesters, whether it be the way in which federal agencies are being used to target people who dissent, the FCC going after radio stations owned by Democrats, the way that the U.S. attorney in D.C. is threatening to lock up people simply because they interfere with Elon Musk's operations at Doge, to the targeted attempts to harass law firms that represent Democrats, or universities where dissent and protest happens, or journalists who don't use the words that the administration wants them to use. There is a pretty massive, systematic campaign to try to diminish the ability for people to protest. And if they're successful in that, then it makes the thievery, it makes the corruption easier to get away with. But here's what gives me hope. Here's what not just give me hope, here's what gives me optimism, right? Here's what causes me to believe that they won't get away with it. We didn't even advertise this town hall. Like, we just sent out an email to people who contact our office, and within like 24 hours, it was full to capacity with 1,200 people having RSVP'd, right? This is happening everywhere around the country. This is not a moment where leaders are asking people to do something and they're unwilling to do it. This is a moment where people are begging for things to do, are begging to be plugged in, right? And so this is a sign that this country is not going to stand for this. That despite how industrious they are in trying to suppress our ability to hold them accountable, we are not going to let them win. And this is what's happening here in this hall. This is what's happening in every corner of the country. It is what gives me optimism that we will be able to survive and win in this moment. Because when you have a moment like this, where there is an attempt to essentially transition the country away from an open participatory democracy, there are really two tools that you have at your disposal. You have mobilization, right? Mass mobilization. You've heard these theories that in a society that is under threat of losing its form of government, a democracy or a republic, once you get 3% of the population that is willing to mobilize, there is lots of history that shows that becomes enough to essentially stop the arrest of democracy. There's plenty of history to show that mass mobilization works. And so this is mobilization, right? I mean, you're seeing it happen, and it may ultimately need to happen not with thousands of people, but with hundreds of thousands of people. But mobilization is happening. The beginnings of a mass mobilization are occurring. The second tool you have is the court system, right? Is the legal system, because most of what they are doing is wildly illegal. Donald Trump complains that you've got this activist judiciary that's every single day ruling that something he is doing is unconstitutional. And that is not because the judiciary is acting irregularly. It is because he is doing something every single day that is unconstitutional, right? And so you have the courts who have been generally, thus far, stepping up and defending the Constitution, saying that the president cannot change the way that somebody becomes a citizen of the United States, that the president of the United States cannot unilaterally declare that an agency that has been authorized and funded by Congress can be disappeared, that the president of the United States is not actually in charge of deciding how money is spent. That is the Article I branch of Congress. The courts have been consistent in saying that the president has to cease this lawlessness. Now, he has not complied with uniformity at all, but you have not yet reached, what you might call that 5-alarm constitutional crisis, when the Supreme Court has told him that he has to do something and the president blatantly ignores the totality of the ruling. The courts so far are holding up and doing the right thing. Mobilization is happening all across the country, and that's not to say that our democracy isn't weaker. That's not to say that the threat isn't serious, but the building blocks are there to be able to survive this moment. And so before I turn to questions, I'll just say a few more things. Well, let me say maybe three more things. That's a few, right? A few equals three. Of course, whenever you say you're going to say three, then you're going to get that like Rick Perry moment, and you're going to forget the third. So, I want you to hold everybody accountable, okay? And when I say I want you to hold everybody accountable, that means Republicans and Democrats, okay? So your job as people who care about this country is to hold everybody accountable. And so I know that for most people in this room, your ire and angst is focused on what Donald Trump is doing. But I also know, because I'm alive and I listen, that there are a lot of people who have angst and ire about the approach the Democrats have taken. And let's have that conversation, right? I'm here for that conversation. I agree with some of the critiques that you will have, but our fire has to be on the thievery, on the corruption, on the destruction of our democracy. That's where our focus has to be. And what I know as a student of history is that when democracies die, one of the ingredients is that the opposition is hopelessly divided, is engaged in nonstop internecine warfare. And that, again, that is not to say that you shouldn't hold us accountable for doing and saying the right things, engaging in the right strategy and tactics. But it's just a reminder that we have to understand who the real threat is here. So let's have both conversations, but let's understand what the priority has to be. The second thing to say is this. You know, I don't have a lot of critiques of Kamala Harris's campaign. I think she was in a very tough spot, a very difficult position coming into the race so late. But she obviously made the tentpole of her closing campaign a defense of democracy, which made sense, right? Because we actually see that she was right, that this guy is a threat to democracy. But it made it feel as if our party was defending the existing version of democracy, right? Which is not a great version of democracy because it has been working for the elites, for people with lots of influence and money. It hasn't been, frankly, working very well for regular people. And so every leader, but particularly Democratic Party leaders who do tend to see the government as a mechanism to try to even out the rough edges of the economy, to try to build the basic building blocks of human success, we've got to recognize that this government cannot be the government that ultimately rules, that we have to be a party of reform. And we lost that election in part because people thought that the Republican Party cared more about reform in government than the Democrats did, right? And so we have to get back to some of the things that we used to be for, that we used to celebrate, like getting private sector money completely out of politics. And if it takes a constitutional amendment, pass a constitutional amendment, right? So we have got to get back to being a party that says we want democracy, but we want a better democracy, okay? And yet we shouldn't be afraid to explain that democracy can still work. Because there are a lot of people who are wondering, right, whether democracy can ever work again. There are some people in this country who are very willing to hand power to one person because they think that democracy is hopelessly broken. And it is broken, but it is not hopelessly broken. And I'll just tell you where I came from. I just came from a meeting with a bunch of anti-gun violence advocates in Bridgeport, in one of the higher violence neighborhoods in Bridgeport, a place that is healing. Why? Because last year there were 50% fewer gun homicides in Bridgeport than the year earlier. We are in the midst of a stunning reduction of gun violence in this country. Nationally, gun violence numbers are down 20 to 30%. In Bridgeport, 50%. In Hartford, 50%. The numbers are extraordinary, and it's a hard thing to celebrate, right? Because it's the absence of a bad thing, right? I mean, it's you can't really notice the fact that there are young men and women who are not dead, right? That are alive, that wouldn't have been alive if you hadn't done something, and we did something, right? For 30 years, the gun industry ruled Washington. We did nothing. Shooting after shooting, urban homicide after urban homicide. But after the murders in Sandy Hook that took place in our state, we built in this nation a national movement, a political movement of citizens to say, no, we are not going to let the gun industry dictate our policy and politics. We're going to dictate our policy and politics. And it took us a decade. It wasn't until Uvalde when we finally had the opportunity to reach out across the aisle to Republicans, just enough Republicans who were willing to work with us, and pass in 2022 the first significant anti-gun violence bill in 30 years, right? And what happened? What happened after we did that? 30 years of nothing. And then the most significant bill, and a comprehensive bill, a bill that didn't just change gun laws, but a bill that put lots of money into mental health resources, into school counselors, and into anti-gun violence initiatives in the community. It was a comprehensive bill, $30 billion worth of investment, changes in major gun laws. The gun violence rates in this country started immediately plummeting. As soon as we passed that bill, all of a sudden, the violence rates in our community start to go down. School shootings start to go down. 40% reduction in mass shootings in the last year. And it's a sign, right, that this democracy, however broken it is, however low people's confidence in it is, still can work. Citizens can change political realities. We couldn't do anything on guns for 30 years, and then we decided, citizens decided, that we were going to do something, that we were going to prioritize our kids' lives. We built a movement, we passed a bill, and in my neighborhood of the south end of Hartford today, there are parents who live a stone's throw away from me who are not grieving their dead son or daughter because of what we did. And so it is a reminder that while we have lots of work to do, while this threat is real, this is worth fighting for. This country is worth fighting for. This democracy is worth fighting for. And I, though it sounds kind of implausible, wake up with joy every single day. I do. I wake up with joy every single day. I wake up with joy every single day because I am in a position, I am healthy enough, right? I am privileged enough because of your votes to be in a position to save this thing. And you are here because you've made the same decision. Every single person is in this audience because you are in a position in your life. You are healthy enough, you are safe and secure enough that you can play a role in the defense of this 250-year experiment. And the reason that I feel joyful is not just because that I happen to be in this position, but because we all are in this position together, because we could have been dropped onto this earth at any time or any place, right? And you got dropped into human history in this country, in this moment, right? And you're here because you recognize the obligation you have at a moment like this, in a place like this, where the whole world is watching, where your kids and grandkids are watching and asking, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to stay inside? Are you going to keep the door shut? Or are you going to stand up for what matters? Are you going to stand up for a country that is stronger because we are not all the same? A country in which we get to decide the rules, not a group of elites. You're answering, right, that question. I'm preaching to the choir today, but it is the choir that does the singing. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent this state. I have confidence that together we're going to be able to make sure that this country hangs around for another 250 years. So thanks, guys. Okay. So, do we have mic stands? Do we have mic stands, or you're the mic stand? You're the mic stands. Okay. So they are going to. So we're going to make lines down the middle of these two aisles to ask your questions, and they're going to hold the mic. So they're going to be a mic stand. Because we want to keep. And once we get like half the row filled, that's probably what we're going to have time for. So we're going to ask you to, you can make a comment or a question. We prefer questions, but you can make a comment as well. We're going to hang on to the mic for you because we find that people ask shorter questions if they're not holding the mic. So we'll hang on to the mic for you, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. What I think we'll do is we'll do one at a time to start, but at some point we'll probably do two questions at a time, and I'll try to answer them both. So if you want to give your name and what town you're from, that's probably a good way to start. If you don't, that's fine with me. So we'll start on my left.
All right. Hi, Senator Murphy. I'm Deanne Tatum from Bridgeport, Connecticut. You have recently been reelected, which means you have 5 years before you have to worry about reelect. You're in a unique position of being able to stand in the gap for constituents who are being disappeared by ICE for their First Amendment views on Palestine, specifically from universities who bankroll Israel and want their silence. What are you doing to stand in the gap between your constituents and fascism? You can take risks others feel they cannot because of a new term. What will you do to support your constituents' rights to free expression?
Well,
free
thank
Palestine.
you for the question. So I appreciate the predicate of that question, but I actually don't see any risk in standing up for the basic sanctity of free speech in this nation, right? I think that's a universal. I think that's a universal value. Hopefully you saw the video that I put out about Mahmoud Khalil. I think I was maybe the first or second United States senator to release any extended statement defending the right of anyone legally here in the United States to be able to protest the government. So we have seen this series of disappearances, right? This is what this is. This is what dictators do, is that they take people who are protesting them and they disappear you to a place in which you can't be found by your loved ones. That's what happened to Khalil. They found him eventually, but they had to find him. They weren't told where he went, and he was spirited away because of the content of his speech, as happened to this Columbia University student and others. Now, you can disagree, and disagree vehemently with his speech or her speech. That's up to you. But in this country, right, we don't criminalize speech. We don't lock you up just because you say something that the regime disagrees with. And that protection constitutionally extends to you, whether you are a natural-born U.S. citizen, whether you are here on a student visa, or whether you are a tourist. The Constitution applies to you if you are here legally in the United States. And if you think that this doesn't matter to you because you are not here on a student visa, because you are a citizen, just wait. Just wait, right? Because they first went after a Palestinian immigrant because they thought people would look the other way because of who he was, right? But if you choose to look the other way because the person is not like you, or because you disagree with the speech, then ultimately it will be you. Ultimately it will be you. So I can speak out, right? I can speak out and try to model speech that others will follow, right? So oftentimes I have been the first to step out and say something that maybe others weren't willing to say. And I think on the issue of this one, Mahmoud Khalil, I was amongst the first. And then ultimately you support vigorously the legislation, but in this case, the court cases that will ultimately free those individuals and make clear that the president can't get away with this. So I don't have an army at my disposal, right? So I can speak out, I can support those legal cases, I can try to mobilize constituents to try to reverse this policy. It's illegal, right? So you don't actually have to pass a law to stop this. What he is doing is illegal. So you ultimately have to win the case in the court and make him pay a price politically for it.
Hi, Senator Murphy. I'm Doug Kramer. I'm from Stamford. And I am concerned that basically Elon Musk is, destroying the government, blowing it up into more pieces than a SpaceX rocket. And the thing they say is, well, there's waste, fraud, and abuse. And I couldn't agree with that more. I heard you, I think, say, oh, well, we need to reform the government and giving campaign finance as an example, and I would completely agree with that. But I would hope that you would not acknowledge, as I have heard some of the Democratic caucus do at the beginning of these things, saying, oh yes, well, there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. And to say, yeah, well, we have to fix these things, but that doesn't mean we have to blow up the government like a Cybertruck.
Guys, I'll control the town hall. So, okay, let me respond to that. So listen, I agree with you rhetorically, right? Because when you start by, in talking about Doge, if you start by saying, well, we all agree that there's waste, fraud in government, it suggests that that has anything to do with what DOGE is trying to accomplish, right? So I don't necessarily think that means you don't acknowledge, right, in the right way and in the right manner, that our government can be more efficient. But this is not on the level, right? This is not on the level. And let me give you an example. You guys know all these things, but let me give you an example. So, they are basically just engaged in mass firings, okay? If you really cared about efficiency, you would go in and take a look at who is efficient, who is not, what functions are being done efficiently, what are not, right? You would go in and you would selectively, and if you could downsize, you would downsize the parts of the enterprise that are less efficient than the others. But of course, that is not what they're doing. They are literally using an AI algorithm to find anybody who is vulnerable to being fired, right? So that's why they are firing anybody who is a probationary employee, because while you're a probationary employee, there's a slightly stronger legal case that you can be let go. But who are probationary employees? A, it's everybody that has been hired recently. Well, that has nothing to do with whether you are efficient or not, or whether you are serving an official function. But you know who else is a probationary employee? Anybody that has been recently promoted, right? Which are actually the best people, which are the people that have deserved to take a new role, but after you've been promoted, you are technically a probationary employee. So this has nothing to do with actually making the government more efficient. But back to and I'm giving these lines, I'm answering these questions way too long, but this is an important point. When I talk about people lacking faith in government, it is in part because they have seen pretty wild government inefficiency, right? Like, we passed a really important law that funded the build out of renewable infrastructure and renewable energy in this country. It takes criminally too long to be able to build that kind of infrastructure. It takes way too long to build a bridge, to put up solar panels, to build charging infrastructure. And so when people see how long things take that we've all already agreed on, it does cause them to start to rethink their support for the whole idea of the democratic enterprise. So no, we should not do anything to concede that this thing, DOGE, is on the level, but I think it would be a mistake to overlearn that lesson and decide that we are not going to have an on-the-level conversation as a party and as a country about how to make government work better for people.
Okay, good. Thanks. Dr. Thomas Hedberg with International Medical Crisis Response. First of all, I think you're right on target about the transition of the country from a democracy into an oligarchy. And I think historically, that has always been the trend. It always seems to morph from a democracy up to rule by the strong and the powerful. And I'm glad that there's this optimism about people fighting back against the oligarchy. And I think the more important question, however, is why we had 50% or more, and depending on how you look at the factors, of the American public voting in people who are known criminals and people who are really belong in a mental institution, and I think you know who I'm talking about. But the critical issue is there's a reason for that. And one of the reasons is the amount of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda that is pounded out every single day, 24 hours a day, every 3 to 4 minutes to millions of people via social media. So, 2 questions, 2 straight questions. A, is there anything that you or the Democrats or any good-hearted person is doing to deal with MDP, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda? And second, if there were an organization here in Connecticut that would like to perhaps share some ideas, some novel ideas about how to deal with that, how would we reach you?
All right, good questions. Good questions. So, but I think, but listen, again, the predicate is really important, and we'll probably get to this later on, but it is important to recognize that, like, he didn't hide himself, right? I mean, he told you he was going to be a dictator on day one, and he told you he was going to pardon the January 6th protesters, and he still won. So you do have to answer this question, right? You do have to answer this question, why? What was it about the Democratic Party that was so unsatisfactory to people that they were willing to entertain him? And what about the information flows may have mattered? So yes, there are a couple things that we can do. One is just restore liability to the companies that control the information for the harm that it does, right? We have exempted the information platforms from legal liability when the misinformation does harm. They have a carve-out from liability, Section 230. And there is, there used to be more bipartisan support for restoring that liability, but there still exists some. That is probably the most important thing that we could do. I get a little nervous when you talk about the government getting involved and sort of deciding what content gets put up and what content doesn't get put up. The liability structure probably is the better way ultimately to make them care at least a little bit about whether they're letting foreign actors put information on their platforms or whether they're allowing for blatant lies to be told. So that's probably the best idea. The second part. Oh, just reach out to our office. Find that you got that guy's card. So find Mike afterwards. Try that mic again. There we go.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Pietro Marghella. I specialize in disaster medicine and public health preparedness. I spent 30 years in the Navy, retiring as a captain, and I consider it the greatest honor in my life to wear that uniform for so long. About 18 months ago, I wrote an article in the U.S. Naval Institute's Proceedings that was titled "Public Health is a National Security Issue." And one of the things I highlighted in the article was the brutal tale of the tape of COVID. 3 points. And the refrain each time is by double. We lost more people, 1.3 million people in this country, than each of the 5 largest countries by population and gross GDP worldwide, by double. We lost more people than we lost during the worst public health crisis in human history, recorded human history, the 1918-1919 influenza pandemic, by double. And perhaps the most shocking statistic is that we lost more people than all of the wars of the 20th and 21st century combined, by double. And I lay that responsibility directly at the foot of the president and his mismanagement of the COVID pandemic during his last presidency. If I look around in this audience, I'm 63 years old, and I know this will resonate with a lot of people. There were diseases that we grew up with that were existential threats to us on a daily basis. Smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, malaria, tetanus, polio. Does everybody remember the fear of lockjaw that we had just playing in the schoolyard? We eliminated all of those things in the 20th century. It was one of the arguably greatest triumphs of science in human history. And now they're coming back, and they're coming back with a vengeance. And we all know the reason why they're coming back, because as the gentleman who preceded me pointed out, I think he was talking about the same guy, we've put a certifiable lunatic in charge of Health and Human Services. So I'll repeat, these are existential threats, not only to us in our old age, but more importantly to our children. And my question is, what is Congress going to do about these imminent public health threats we face if change doesn't happen soon? And the last thing to remind you guys about is that, to quote a Ray Bradbury novel, something wicked this way is coming, and that's bird flu. Yeah. And it's not if, it's when.
Yeah. So thank you for your service, first of all, heroic. Okay, so there will be variations on this question, and I just want to be honest with you guys, right? There will be a question: what are you going to do to stop, right, what they're trying to do? There's just a reality, right, which is that they control the White House, they control the House, and they control the Senate. So we don't have the opportunity as the opposition party to pass any laws that stop what he is likely to do at HHS. If he does something illegal, then we pursue that vigorously through the courts. If they try to force us to do something here in Connecticut that we refuse to do, like disrupt or unwind our own vaccine program, then we have to choose as a state to stand up to them. And that won't be easy, by the way, because at some point they will threaten Connecticut. They will say, if you don't destroy, X program, then there's going to be a consequence. We'll cut off your funding for this. And we'll have to make a decision collectively. No. For instance, the childhood vaccine program is too important. We are not going to be threatened to get rid of it. So we will fight them legally. We will work when we can with Republicans who still believe in vaccines. But right now, to be honest, no Republicans are willing to work with us to actually pass legislation to stop what is happening at HHS. And then we will work together as a state to make sure that we are best protected as possible. But this will be an unsatisfactory answer to many of your questions, right? What do you do to stop it? Well, in a democracy, right? In a democracy, when you win the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and you control everything, you get to implement your agenda. And the hope is that the country will quickly come to the realization that an agenda that involves the rapid spread of measles, right, is not an agenda that they want to put up with or empower for any longer than is absolutely necessary. All right. Because I see the line, we're definitely not going to get to, I don't even think we're going to get to these whole lines, but I'm going to do two questions at once. So keep your questions short. I will shorten my answers, and we'll do two at a time right now.
Hi, my name is Jackie Homan, and I'm from Greenwich. Donald Trump, a couple days ago, or maybe it was just even yesterday, signed an executive order on protecting election integrity. And I thought that seemed particularly important in Connecticut, considering Wanda Pataki and her crew in Bridgeport have 150 election-related charges filed against them. And it seems like what Trump is arguing for are simple common sense measures that have been taken in 70 countries around the world. For instance, using photo voter ID. And you've previously suggested that photo ID laws are nothing more than attempts to infringe on voting rights. And I find that statement a little bit confusing, since photo ID laws don't infringe on people's ability to buy alcohol or weed, and they don't stop people from traveling or driving or banking or a lot of other things.
Guys, be respectful, please,
so
guys.
The reason I'm asking this is in 2024, you were endorsed by the Working Families Party, and it had a questionnaire that included a question about whether you supported non-citizen voting in local elections and extending Husky to all illegals. And you've also been on the record saying that the people you care about most are undocumented
guys,
Americans.
This is a very respectful question.
And in 2024, you also said that the people you care about most were undocumented Americans. These are people that broke the law to come here and cost taxpayers in Connecticut at least $1.3 billion. And we've seen a Tren de Aragua member implicated in a murder in Stamford just down the road. So here's my question.
Go ahead. Ask
Here's my question.
Ask the question.
Why do you
Easy,
care
guys.
about illegal immigrants more than U.S. citizens? And what title do you have in the color revolution that's being funded by your buddy Alex Soros and his dad George Soros?
Okay, great. All right. Gotcha. We'll do this. We'll do yours as well. We'll do both. Guys, listen, there's going to be questions you like and there are going to be questions you don't like, but let's try to be respectful to both. Go ahead.
Senator, thank you for being here tonight. Senator, Elon Musk is not the danger to this country. You and your party are. I was struck by that. Excuse me.
Guys, come on.
I was struck by that when I tried to use the dumb gender-neutral bathroom outside. Your party preys upon impressionable children and indoctrinate them into your insane ideological cult. A cult.
Guys,
You're just taking time away from your own questions.
Let him ask a question. He'll ask a question.
Your party preys upon impressionable children and indoctrinate them into your insane ideological cult, which holds many fanatical views, but none so deranged as the idea that boys are girls and girls are boys. I know why you're trying to stop us from speaking. You silence the opposing side because you have no argument. You can only hide under your beds like pathetic cowards. By imposing this vile nonsense on students to the point of forcing young girls to share locker rooms,
All right.
What will you do?
Guys, let's go ahead. Ask your question.
You keep interrupting me.
Ask the question.
What will you do to protect the children of this country from child abusers disguised as doctors from mutilating people?
Okay, thank you. All right. So we have nothing to fear from transgender and gay children in this country. And listen, I respect everybody's views, and I hope that you will too. I hope you'll let everybody ask their questions, right? But I refuse to live in a world in which we are told to believe that the biggest threats that we face are non-binary, transgender kids, drag shows, right? This is all an attempt to distract us from when the elites are trying to capture government for themselves, right? What do? They try to turn us against each other. They try to make us believe that the biggest threats we face are our neighbors, our children based upon their sexual orientation, our immigrants who are coming to this country just to seek a better life, our Muslims who practice a religion that is different from the one that founded this country. It's all an attempt to just make us scared, to make us wake up in the morning and think to ourselves that it's our neighbors that present the biggest threat to us. That's not a world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world in which I love my neighbors, right? In which I understand that the foundational strength of this country is that people come here from all over the world to seek a better life in which everybody gets to express who they are, love who they want, be who they are that is true to themselves. That's the country that I want to live in. And what I know is that if you're trying to capture democracy for yourself, you try to make us scared of each other. It's just not I want everybody to be able to ask their question, but that's just not a world that I want to live in.
My name is Sharon, and I am with Indivisible Stamford, and we are having a protest next week. My question to you is, we are so grateful for your speaking out and for your leadership, but where are the other Democrats? This is a hair on fire moment. We have a handful of Democrats, and you know who they are. I know you're going on tour with Maxwell Frost. However, why aren't the Democrats congregating on the Capitol every single day to call out every abusive thing that this regimen, this fascist government is doing to us? The Democrats need to treat it like the emergency that it is. We are all here because we're angry and we're scared.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Hello, Senator. Max Barisi from Greenwich. Killer jeans, by the way. Now, I'm what you'd call a member of the progressive left, so shout out to Indivisible. You'll see me there. All right, but my question for you is that we are angry, we are scared, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of the people in the room would agree with me that the time for decorum is coming to an end, and now. You said 3% of people marching in any way, shape, or form on any of these institutions can shut it down, and I hope that we can get to that, or I hope it doesn't have to get to that, but a quicker question. I have been woefully embarrassed, I think, by a lot of the Democratic leadership's response on ending the continued genocide in Gaza. Now, I understand that it's hard to speak out against this, and we need to ensure equal dignity of both the Israelis and the continued existence of Palestine, but we're not seeing enough. I know your record on this is better than just about everybody in the Senate. I'm not coming at you at a place of aggression here, but what kind of conversations are you having behind the scenes with your Democratic counterparts to make sure this stops, and now?
Good, thank you.
Sure.
So, two very big, important questions, so let me try to do them justice. So let me just tell you my theory of the case on how you meet this moment, okay? And I will admit that this is a conversation that's happening inside the Democratic Party right now as to whether you engage in sort of normal tactics or whether you have to engage in exceptional ways. So I think the threat to our democracy is real. It is acute. I think it is very likely you are going to need hundreds of thousands of people engaged in mass-scale mobilization. And so how do you prepare for that moment? Well, if we internally are meeting this moment with normal tactics, if we aren't willing to engage in risky behavior, right? And it would have been risky for the entire Democratic Party, for instance, to boycott the State of the Union speech. It would have been risky for us to say no to that continuing resolution and have had the government shut down for a period of time. But, how do you ask ordinary citizens when the time comes to take risks? How do you ask the institutions of higher education who are under assault, or the legal profession, or journalists to do risky things, to compromise their businesses in order to stand up to the corruption, unless internally you are willing to show that you are risk tolerant as well? And so I'm not somebody that believes that there's no connection between what happens inside the Beltway and what is happening out in the public. And so I can only speak for myself in this moment, but I'm going to continue to argue that we should speak strongly, that we should take risks, that we should engage in exceptional tactics, because to me, that is the only way that you ultimately create that connective tissue between the leaders of the party and the grassroots when that moment comes that we need everybody out on the street. So listen, you know what I think about about this, and listen, of course, I think it is always important to state at the outset that what happened in October of 2023 was an abomination. Israel has a right to defend itself, but ultimately, I wish that our friends in Israel had watched what happened to us in Iraq and Afghanistan, and had watched how, when the United States was so cavalier about the human and civilian consequences of our military operations, we ended up emboldening the very enemy that we said that we are fighting. We ended up with a generational insurgency that we eventually succumbed to in Afghanistan, that still exists in and around the Middle East, in part because we didn't understand that when you are engaging in a military occupation that doesn't care about the consequences on civilians, it plays into the hands of the very people that you are fighting. It is immoral to not care about civilian death, but it is also a strategic mistake. And so, yes, I have voted to stop some of the most recent arms sales until we get commitments on humanitarian relief and until we are smarter about our targeting. But I will admit it's a tough. But I will admit, as somebody who has a fundamental belief in the existence of a Jewish state in the Middle East, I want to be able to defend Israel. I just want them to do it in a way that makes it less likely, not more likely, that there is going to be a permanent insurgency against that very idea in the region.
Hi, I'm Emily Kelting, and thank you so much for what you're doing and going around the country, speaking in these town halls. Thank you to AOC and Bernie Sanders, who are doing the same. Thank you. Thank you to Pete Buttigieg on TV. Thank you to Liz Cheney. How about you forming a coalition, an opposition coalition, where you put out your own messages and you elect, you leaders come together to organize all the protests, and the New York Times and all major media is not really doing a great job at covering exactly what Trump is doing. You do it. You put out the messages. You state what we're standing for in the democracy. And if you could get together a group of all these really strong people like yourself, you head it up. I mean, you're doing an amazing job.
So you just want me to fix it?
No, I want you to.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
No, I just want you to get together with the others and yeah.
All right, I got you. I'll respond to it. Go ahead.
So thank you for the good work you're doing, Senator. So I have a quick question here. Many of your constituents are in fear of losing their Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and a host of other benefits because of the way things are going at the Capitol, if you will. Folks want to get involved, and oftentimes they look at your social media and other different platforms that you have, and they get bombarded by donations and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And a lot of folks and constituents want to get involved. I want to know, what are some ways they could get involved that's not just monetarily?
Yeah, good. Both good questions. So, to your question, yes, I am every single day trying to go out and create those partnerships, as you, I think, might have mentioned. Well, obviously, my number one obligation is to be here in Connecticut and do town halls here. I do think I have an obligation to help organize a national mobilization, and so tomorrow I will be out in one of these Republican town halls in Michigan where the Republican is refusing to talk to his constituents. And I'll be there with my friend, so I teamed up with my friend Max Frost, congressman from Florida, who's fantastic. And I think you'll see more of that. I think you will see more of us coming together, both in our states and around the country, to show that the group of us that maybe is speaking with voices that are a little bit more clear are gonna work together. To your question, so yes. Listen, donations matter, but what really matters is presence. What matters is volume. You talked about your fear about the cuts in Medicaid, okay? They're talking, like I said, about $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid. That would be devastating. That would close hospitals. That would close addiction treatment centers. Millions of people in this country would lose their health care. That's not unlike what they were proposing to do in 2017 when they were going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That was their number one priority. Everybody thought it was a foregone conclusion, but it didn't happen. Why? Because we mobilized, because we turned out, both in town halls, in Washington, we overwhelmed their phone lines, and in the end we made them just uncomfortable enough that just three of them decided to vote against it. Their margins are no bigger this time around. You only have to convince 3 or 4 of them to vote no against the Medicaid cuts. And so it really is just volume that makes a difference here. If we all stand up and speak up, we might find ourselves in a position where we have convinced 2 or 3 or 4 of them to do the right thing. I can't guarantee that, but it is volume. These groups that are represented here, whether it be Move On or Indivisible, 203 Action, lots of local groups that work, join those groups because they are the ones that are best sort of plugged into the moments where you need to raise your voice. It is true that many of us are still continuing to raise money because none of this stuff happens without resources. The problem we have is that the Republicans have a permanent paid-for mobilization infrastructure in this country and a messaging infrastructure. Democrats don't. So we actually both have to turn out people and raise money so that we can be able to fund the mobilization campaign that me and many others are leading. So thank you both.
Hi there, my name is Celeste Cobb and I'm from Reading, and I started an opposition group in November, and we're pretty busy. And what I feel, so I respect all that you do, you're an amazing orator. You reflect back exactly how we're feeling. It's great, it feels good, no doubt.
It sounds like there's a but coming.
There is a but coming. There is a but coming, and one of them is related to hearing, I don't know how many times I hear, the Senate is red, the Congress is red, the executive branch is red. And what I put up next to that is, I have a full-time job. I have other opposition groups out there who are busting their butt, putting themselves at risk, quite frankly, going to Tesla takedowns, doing any number of things that exposes them, adding on all these additional kind of risky activities, whether I'm raising a family, whatever it is. We're going above and beyond. That's why we're all here today. And what I don't hear is how you are going to lead us. I hear that you hear us. What I don't hear is how you lead us. And I would put a little, how to put this into terms is I feel like if you're a cardiologist, you've come to me and you told me I have a bad heart. It's not doing well. You open me up and you say, yep, there's the bad heart. And then you walk away. And what I want you to do is take care of help me. I'm not saying you gotta do it, but I feel like you gotta step outside of what is comfortable, because that's what we're all doing.
Got it. I can be better. I'm up for self-improvement.
Hi, my name is Erin Shaw. I'm from New Canaan. And yes, I appreciate the work that you're doing, but we are in a 5-alarm fire. And there are seemingly no repercussions for every act of defiance that he is doing, for the illegal activities from Musk, for war plans being leaked on signal, and then the gaslighting and deflection is unbelievable. What I want to know, okay? What I want to know is when he defies the Supreme Court, because he will, what do we do then?
So, listen, I think these two questions go together. I don't point out that they control the House and the Senate and the presidency to try to excuse any of us from our responsibility or to try to excuse myself from leadership. It is, though, important to understand what we can and cannot do, right? Because you want to measure your action to what is possible, right? So that's why I point out the Medicaid cuts, right? So we can stop the Medicaid cuts. We can, right? We can mobilize to make it so clear to them that they will lose their seats in the next election if they vote to cut Medicaid by $800 billion, that they decide not to do it, right? So that is a power that we have to make them so afraid of the electoral consequences of their actions that they choose to do something different. Whether or not we like it, the Supreme Court is political, right? They are paying attention to the pulse of the nation. So if they see us turning out in massive numbers to oppose the corruption and the thievery and the destruction of the rule of law, that may have an impact on the decision that they ultimately make. I'm not saying that we all don't have a responsibility to act and I don't have a responsibility to lead. But yes, sometimes people believe that Democrats can just stop it, right? And there is a difficulty in doing that when they control the administration and the White House. What happens if they if they confront a Supreme Court decision with open and brazen violation, okay? As you know, and whether you like the answer or not, the Constitution has no answer to that question, right? Because I don't possess an army, right? The Congress doesn't possess an army. There is no answer to what happens in that case. But we have plenty of examples from other civilizations and nations where that has happened, and it has been solved by mass public mobilization. It has been solved by members of the regime's party deciding that the rule of law was more important than loyalty to the party. That's what happened in South Korea, right? The protests were not just one side, right? They were both political parties. And so, as you would imagine, both publicly and behind the scenes, right, we are trying to do the work necessary to make sure that if that moment happens, that we not just have Democrats and progressives out on the street, but that we have industry leaders, business leaders, Republican local elected officials, Republican congressmen. I can't promise you that will happen, but don't think that we aren't thinking about how we best meet that moment. It'll be mostly whether we have millions of people out on the street, but it'll also be a question of whether we have convinced some of his loyalists to finally break that line. I can't promise you that will happen, but believe me, there's a lot of thought being put into that. So thank you very much.
Should I hold it? Okay, got it. Oh, just like this? Yep. Okay, my name's Emma Scott from Shelton, Connecticut. So I think we all remember what the guy in the red hat said about trans people. Thankfully, I think most people here realize that's just a lie to rile up a base against a scapegoat. But there are a lot of people out here in that country that do think that stuff because they hear it from the media or social media, or they just hear it. And it's obviously been created by far-right think tanks as part of a propaganda campaign. But the effects are real. The effects are real.
Of course.
In state legislation across the country, and now from the federal level, there are unprecedented attacks. And I've got to be honest, my community right now believes that they are facing existential threats. They are, a lot of people in my community came from other states because they were fleeing them, states from the South like Florida or Texas, to come here to Connecticut because they felt they could be safe here and have their health care and right to exist protected. And now they don't even feel safe about that, really. There's a lot of people in my community that just want to go to another country. They would feel safer in Mexico or Thailand than they would here in Connecticut right now because of what's going on. And I really think there's no way to underestimate that level of feeling threatened. And I'm also seeing like a lot of Democrats not all, but a lot of Democrats who should be standing up right now, capitulating and giving in and saying, well, maybe you do have a point about this and that, about trans sports or about trans youth getting health care or whatever. And where's that going to end, though? Where's the capitulation going to end? Is it going to be, well, maybe you have a point, it's okay to take away the health care of all trans people as long as we don't all throw them into jail and take away their right to exist, And I mean, right now, maybe even right now that seems a little far-fetched, but like if you look at the trajectory we're on right now, that's not that far-fetched. This has happened in other countries. In Hungary, they have already banned any kind of assembly and pride. If you just look at Russia, it's basically illegal to be queer or trans at all. You can just get sent to a gulag.
It's a really important topic. I'll answer it. Thanks. I just want to make sure we get to as many as we can.
Hello, Senator. My name is Melissa Spone. I'm from Wilton. And I want to switch gears a little bit to national security. The Trump administration's cavalier and illegal use of signal chat to communicate classified information scares the hell out of me on so many levels. How do we know if the Trump administration has been using Signal as a regular means to unlawfully avoid the Presidential Records Act and accountability and leaking potentially dangerous information to our adversaries? Can the courts or Congress subpoena all their Signal chat texts since Inauguration Day? What else, and what can we do to protect ourselves?
Sure. Listen, thank you for raising the specter, right? It is real. You certainly can imagine a world, having watched this administration already decide to disappear from the face of the earth, individuals who are speaking out on college campuses about Gaza, from doing the same thing if people are speaking up on behalf of trans rights, right? And so we have to understand that this threat can become bigger and much more menacing. And there is an opportunity here to stand up for the trans community, also to stand up for immigrants as well, because people actually, when you get into a conversation with them, know that they can't afford their health insurance, not because of a trans teenager, right? They know that they haven't gotten any benefit of the increase in production in this economy over the last 20 years, not because of an illegal immigrant, right? They know that there is something that stinks in our economy today, that we have a rigged economy on behalf of the elites. And when you get in a conversation with folks, they actually understand the distraction campaign that is being waged by the right. And so you shouldn't avoid it. We should confront it head on, and we shouldn't assume that there is a dystopian world that we could soon be living in which the targets are not just Palestinian student visa holders, but members of the trans and gay community who are American citizens. So this is a fight that is worth having. We should not shrink from it. We shouldn't overlearn lessons from the 2024 election. We should stand up for what's right, and we should call them out on their bullshit. On Signal, I mean, listen, I don't know what to tell you. This is criminal conduct, so the Department of Justice should be investigating, but they are not, because the Department of Justice has been turned into an arm of the White House. We have at least gotten one Republican in the Senate, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, to say that there should be an independent investigation, but it's not clear whether he believes that independent investigation should involve subpoena power. So it's an open question as to whether we will do any subpoenas, because Republicans are in charge of the Senate and they would have to consent to the subpoenas. But what is so, I've been pretty loud about this. I think it's outrageous that they put a journalist on the Signal chain. I think it's outrageous that they use Signal. But what I think is most outrageous is that Pete Hegseth looked America in the eye and told them that 2 + 2 = 7, right? And I mean, the gall involved in saying, I didn't text any war plans, none of that was classified. And this is what's most concerning, right? Because the one thing that is necessary for a democracy, especially a multicultural democracy, to exist, is truth, right? Is ground truth. That while we disagree on solutions to problems, while we may interpret facts differently, that there are still facts, right? That if I hold up a white piece of paper, we all say that's a white piece of paper. If I hold up a pink piece of paper, we all agree it's a pink piece of paper. You literally can't hold this country together if Pete Hegseth tells you that 2 + 2 = 7. And so I think that's in part what we have to be focused on as much as anything else. And I think why this has become a multi-day story is because the American people were actually shocked by that. Like, they had gotten they'd gotten a little used to Trump's kind of like weird meandering lies in which he's always got a little bit of a condition attached to it and you're not like totally sure what he said. But like, Pete Hegseth doesn't know how to lie well. Like he's bad at it. And people were like, for the first time, people were like, oh, wait a second. I don't think people can be in charge if they don't see, right, the math that I see. So I think it's an important moment for a lot of reasons.
Good evening, Senator Murphy. Thank you very much for being here. My name is George Lensick from Stamford. I am very concerned about how President Trump is cozying to dictators like President Putin, how he is bashing our allies, how he has insulted Canada and essentially put on tariffs that are totally without merit. He has betrayed Ukraine, which is absolutely disgraceful and unprecedented in the history of this country. Our prosperity depends not just on our ingenuity, but also on free trade, our alliances, and the international rule of law. What can Congress do to counteract what President Trump is doing to repair our relationship with our allies and essentially fight against these tariffs that are going to hurt all of us with higher inflation?
Yep, thanks. Okay, great.
First of all, thank you, Senator. I came all the way from Middletown, Jyoti Vailakara. I've been following you for a long time, and I can tell you, as somebody with a finger on the pulse of what the country is going through, I do believe that you're one of the people who really mean what you say. And I don't say that across the board. So, a few things, like starting off, I know the one with the swastika, red hat, you know, those are the people who would like to see somebody like me, a first-generation immigrant who came as a student 33 years ago, and I do believe I've contributed quite a bit to the country. I actually did get an immigrant award last year for the contributions to society, not bragging here, but just to make a statement about what immigrants can do for the country. I'm in a very good place right now, but I also want to make sure the same American dream that I realized, which at this point, I have to say it's a little damp right now, my enthusiasm, but I'm somebody who's never fearful of anything. I talk my mind, I talk too much. That's my problem. But right now, that's actually an asset for me. But I want to see my daughter have the same chance at the American dream that I have had. But I also want to say one more thing, not to take too much of time. I'm very cognizant of all the people waiting to have your ear, Senator. When Emma, I believe it was Emma Stone, who talked about the transgender piece. Is it Emma? Oh, sorry. Thank you, thank you. I am a psychologist. I see in my office, I have the clients, the kind of clients who actually, I have to spend sleepless nights not knowing if they are going to commit suicide the next day or not. And as a non-elected individual, I want to see our elected officials doing a lot more for those people whom we care about too much. But I also want to make sure that I, especially me, not being in a position to really save their life at all times, it has to come from the top. And they're so scared that I do not want to use the name, the traitor-in-chief that we have in the White House. His name comes up too many times in my office that I don't think I have enough sage to actually cleanse and detoxify my office. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, by the way.
No. So, well said. Well, first of all, thank you for what you have contributed to the country. Thank you for your reminder that we are a nation that is who we are today, that is as strong as we are today because of our history of immigration. And if we lose that history, we're cooked. But let me just say to you this. So I go down to the Senate floor every few months to give a speech in defense of transgender, non-binary, and gay children. And I do that not actually because I think that that speech is going to change the mind of Republicans. I also am the one that when they try to pass these resolutions on girls' sports, I'm always the one that goes down and stops the resolutions from passing. Not because I think that I'm going to change their mind either, but because I'm so glad to hear you say it as somebody in the profession. I know that these kids listen to what leaders are saying. And when these kids get told over and over and over again that not only are they not normal, but they are a threat to their community, they internalize that. You obviously know the epidemic rates of self-harm and attempted suicide of our transgender, gay, and non-binary youth community. And so I sometimes feel that maybe the service that I can provide is to just occasionally go give a speech that might go viral a little bit on the internet to tell them, no, not everybody believes that about you, right? In fact, most of your community doesn't believe that about you. Most of your community loves you and celebrates you. You are hearing from the squeakiest part of the wheel that is not representative of everybody's feelings. So thank you for what you've done on behalf of those kids. So listen, I don't have a great answer for you on Ukraine. This is a really, really difficult moment. He is forcing Ukraine to make concessions. He's forcing Russia to make no concessions. He wants a ceasefire. That ceasefire could work as long as Ukraine is not forced to pull back from the line of contact, because if they are, Russia will violate it on day one. That the ceasefire could work if there's a European force that then comes into Ukraine to sort of assure that Putin doesn't take advantage. That ceasefire could work if we don't release all of the sanctions, so we keep up pressure on the Russian economy. Obviously, you have a lot of back channels that are happening to the president from Republicans in the Senate who still believe in supporting Ukraine. I cannot tell you if those will be successful. He seems hell-bent on getting some kind of deal. There is a version of that deal that is very bad, that is essentially signing the death warrant for Ukraine. There's a version of that deal that we could maybe live with. So time will tell. But I agree with you. This is a moment where the entire world order is threatened to unwind. And if Putin gets Ukraine, he likely will continue moving. China will move much faster towards Taiwan and perhaps beyond. And all of a sudden, the stability of the world order, in which big nations don't get to expand their borders by invading smaller nations, becomes a historical anachronism. And the benefit that has come to the United States through that stability, especially the commercial stability, is also a historical anachronism. So it's really important that we get this right, and we're working as hard as we can behind the scenes with our Republican colleagues to get them to influence. We're getting to, okay, I know, sorry guys. We're going to do a few more, but I'm not going to get to the whole line.
My name is Christina. I'm from Oakville, Connecticut, and this feels kind of like a gross question, but I have to ask it. And this is something that only you, Senator Murphy, are uniquely positioned to champion. But we're in a constitutional crisis, and as you mentioned, this calls for exceptional action. And thinking outside of the usual box of politics as usual. The Second Amendment was written into the Constitution as a means to safeguard against tyranny. Is there a way to use that issue that is championed by the Republicans to reach across the aisle in order to find a common ground and gain unity as a country?
Okay.
Senator Murphy, my name is Patrick Cummings. I live here in Stamford. I'm a military veteran. I served in the Air Force from 2009 to 2013. The actions by the Trump regime and Elon Musk have disproportionately affected and will continue to affect veterans. As we know, they make up a third of the federal workforce, and they're losing jobs just every single day. Plans to cut, I think, 80,000 jobs at the VA by August. The suicide hotline employees were indiscriminately fired for God knows why. And this is going to certainly continue to affect veterans going forward. It's only going to get worse, I imagine. And I just wanted to state that healthcare and service-connected disability compensation, these are not entitlements. These are benefits which we earn through our honorable military service and injuries sustained in the line of duty. And the VHA delivers health care for those injuries and diseases that disproportionately affect veterans. And that is veteran-specific health care that cannot be provided by the community outside. And my last point is the shameful erasing of military history under the guise of DEI and purging people of color, women, and others who are pioneers who served, fought, and died for this country, buried at Arlington National Cemetery. They didn't even have rights when they were doing that, and this is how we treat them, by wiping them off just the map. That is disgraceful. And also, my last point on our current active duty military, the purge of transgender troops who volunteered to serve their country is an absolute disgrace, and that needs to be dealt with. And my question for you is how will you and the Democrats continue to minimize the damage and make sure veterans and our active duty military members are taken care of properly and the contract is fulfilled?
Thank you. Thank you, man. Thank you. So that's a reminder that our veterans who serve our country never stop serving our country, right? Even when they come back home. So let me just say what you said again in case people didn't hear it. Veterans make up 30% of the federal workforce. They are 5% of the private sector workforce. They are 30% of the federal workforce. And when you fire everybody who is a probationary employee, you are predominantly firing veterans. You are firing young veterans, veterans who just came out of the service, who transferred to go do another job in the federal government because they want to keep serving. And just because they are a young veteran, they have all of a sudden been laid off. And so this mass firing, which, by the way, has been stopped for the time being by the courts, has a disproportionate impact on veterans. The very people that we should be lifting up and giving preference for federal jobs are getting disproportionately fired by this policy. And thank you for standing up on this issue of DEI. So let's just be 100% clear. DEI equals white male supremacy, right? That's what they mean by DEI. When they say DEI, they mean no one is worthy to serve this country other than white men, right? That's what they said when the plane crashed, right? Was that the plane crashed because of DEI. And what they meant was that there were women working at the FAA, that there were non-white people working in that control tower. That is what they mean. And so we shouldn't let them get away with the words that they use. It's not diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are talking about a world in which no one is worthy in our society except for those that look like them. On the Second Amendment, I mean, listen, I don't know that we're going to get any agreement on our interpretation of the Second Amendment. I think you saw an actually pretty encouraging case from the Supreme Court last week in which, in a 7-2 decision, the court ruled that the Biden administration could actually regulate ghost guns in this country. And so for some of us that were worried that there was going to be a really radical reinterpretation of the Second Amendment by the Supreme Court, I mean, my worry has not evaporated, but we are seeing the Supreme Court try to cut a little bit of a middle ground. So your question was maybe pointing towards a little saucier conversation. I maybe won't take the bait, but I don't think there's any coming together between Republicans and Democrats in the Second Amendment in the short term. So. All right, we are getting past our time, but I'll try to take a few more. Go ahead.
Really short.
All right.
My name is Harold Topper. I live here in Stamford. I don't want to go down the litany of outrageous things that are going on because we all agree. But I have two questions. Number one, you talk about accountability. When will it be time to point at your Republican colleagues and say, you have told me behind the scenes that you don't agree with this? Number one. Number two, when will it be time for us to counteract the lies in their megaphone, Fox News, and the infrastructure they have to communicate those lies, to tell the truth? because the foundation of truth will support everything before the foundation of lies and help it collapse.
Right.
Hi, I'm Esther. I am 16 and a junior in high school.
Thanks for being here, Esther.
Thank you for taking my question. So I go to a public high school. I've gone to public schools all my life. I'm currently looking at doing the whole college search stuff. In fact, Williams, where you went, is one of my top choices.
Oh, great. Good luck.
And given all of this, Trump's attacks on the board, on the Department of Education, on public education, on higher education, are very scary and worrying for me. And I was wondering what you can and will do, what can be done on the local level, what I can do. Yeah, and thank you for taking my question as well.
Great. Thank you, Esther, for being here. All right, I'm going to do, just because we have this room until 8:30, and it's 8:35, and I'm going to max the police out a little bit, but I'll take two more after Esther, but then we're going to have to cut it off. And if folks who have not asked questions want to find one of my staff people who are going to remain, there's Sarah, and Mike is there, Aaron. If you guys want to find them afterwards and give them your question, we will answer it. So we will get your questions answered, but I'm going to do Esther and then two more after this. Just to make you feel worse, very few Republicans actually tell you behind closed doors that they disagree with what he's doing. I mean, that's a little bit of like a fantasy that is not matched by reality. Most Republicans in the House and the Senate are 100% on board for the destruction of democracy. I mean, you know that because they voted to install him in power even though he lost the 2020 election. A handful of them didn't in the Senate, but the majority of them voted to give him the presidency despite the fact that he lost in the House of Representatives. So most of them are actually, on board because they've decided that loyalty to the leader matters more than loyalty to the will of the public. So unfortunately, there are some, and they're mostly in the Senate. There are Senate Republicans who disagree, but most of them agree. Listen, I think we have to talk more than we do about what's happening and what's going to happen to public education. I mean, they are proposing to eliminate the Department of Education, and they're doing it for one reason and one reason only. They want to privatize all of our public schools. They want to be able to sell our public schools off to the highest bidder. They hate the fact that their sort of private equity and billionaire friends, have their hands on Medicare and Medicaid, but they don't have their hands on the school system. So it's really important for us to talk about this because it is true, but also because we need students to enter this fight. I'm glad that you're here, but I'll just note, right, that there's not a overwhelming number of students that are here, and we need to make students understand that if they get away with this, your public school may be owned by some investment firm in New York City, and it may be being bled for profit instead of being run to support better education. So we should probably talk about this destructive agenda that's happening in our schools more. So thank you.
Marianne, thank you, Senator Murphy. After a disastrous election, you and your Senate colleagues voted to bring Senator Schumer back as Senate Minority Leader. More recently, he voted to help the Republicans move along legislation that will give Trump an unprecedented amount of power over federal spending. In my opinion, Senator Schumer has shown over and over again that he is there to serve the interests of the donor class, the good oligarchs, and not the people in this room. When are you going to demand a minimal level of accountability from Democratic leadership? When are you going to challenge Chuck Schumer for leadership of the Senate?
Great. Turn on the mic, might not be working.
Okay, can you?
There we go,
now?
got it. Yep.
My name's Troy Sandifer, I'm from Newtown. So my question's on foreign aid and USAID funding. Experts believe that this week's decision to end the Gavi program, the global vaccination program, is going to result in an excess 1.2 million children dying in the next 5 years, and that is incremental to an excess of 3 million tuberculosis deaths in that same time period. These programs have been cut despite funding already being appropriated by Congress. I know what you are doing as an individual. My question is, what do I tell the community of hundreds of TB activists that I am a leader in to do? You say mobilize, but can you give us more specific actions than that? Is that bringing 100 people to the Hill? Because we're doing that in 2 weeks. But what else can we do?
So, listen, there is still Republican support for a lot of these global health programs. It may be that the courts are going to force that money to be restored, so there may be hope through the courts. If not, at some point later this year, we are going to try to write a bipartisan budget. I don't know that we will be successful, but if we are, we need a handful of Republicans to step up and say global public health programs and global vaccination programs are important. So yes, the old tactics are still the new tactics. Coming to the Hill, talking to Republicans and telling them to make this a priority may be helpful. We don't need them all to support it. We just need a handful of them to support it. And to also, for those that aren't convinced by the merits of the moral argument, to make the national security argument, right? When you have public health epidemics and crises in other parts of the world, those become very politically unstable places. Those are the places that terrorist groups, right, start to populate and make their arguments for recruitment. So there's a moral argument, a health argument, and there's also a national security argument. So yes, I think it's important to continue to raise this in the traditional way. And by the way, our European partners are trying to step up, right? They are hopeful that they will be able to fill the gap here. And that's another thing that's important to remember, that if we are successful electorally, and this is not a political meeting, but if we make sure that this is a sort of temporary, not permanent assault on global public health, it may be that other nations can step in who might not be able to fill the gap permanently, but could fill the gap in the short run, so that once we elect leadership that cares about America's standing in the world again, we can remedy that. I mean, listen, I understand, the focus is always going to be on leadership. You don't stand up and take a leadership position unless you're willing to take the heat. But this is a broader conversation for the entirety of the Democratic caucus in the Senate and in the House. It would have been a risk to vote against that government funding bill, because it wasn't certain whether the American public would blame Republicans for the shutdown, as I thought they would, or whether they would blame Democrats for the shutdown. But as I said at the beginning, if you don't engage in that kind of risk-tolerant behavior, then nobody is going to take risks out in the American public. And so our leader has a difficult job, because there is not consensus right now in the caucus about which tactics to take. And so leadership gets easier if you're asking the leader to take more risky, engage in more risky tactics, if there's more consensus inside the caucus. And so my focus is on trying to build that consensus so that the next time we have leverage, whether it's on the debt ceiling or on the government shutdown fight that will be coming in just 6 months, we stand up unified and say we are willing to take the risk on behalf of the country.
Murphy, thank you for being here. Voted for you all the time. I'm here on behalf of ALS victims. My late husband died 15 years ago of ALS. All he was able to do was scream. He wasn't even able to wink. The Stephen Hawking story, that's Hollywood. An example of waste is we need more research. It's no longer a disease of a few. It's a disease, probably, if I asked a show of hands of how many people know somebody who had ALS, there'd be a lot of hands that would go up. The research money has to be increased, and it needs to be, this is an example of waste. Instead of giving them a check to the ALS organization in their commercial property in DC, it needs to go directly to Massachusetts General Hospital, who had found a protein in most of ALS victims that grows slowly from head injuries. I'm the one that did the invaluable questionnaire. I got escorted out of their office saying, why after 85 years have you not done a questionnaire? There's a lot more questions, like, we need you to work. One thing with Kennedy is that vitamins are not controlled. They're not FDA controlled. And my late husband took 26 a day for 20 years. UConn toxicology found that they were lethal levels of cadmium, lethal levels of arsenic in his Q10 enzyme.
Good. Is there
So
a question?
the question is, can you get more research, and can you make sure that it goes to the research hospitals versus the organization?
Hi, Senator Murphy. My name is Lee Bobier. I'm from Stamford, Connecticut. And first of all, thank you for holding this event tonight. As a Jewish person and the parent of a college student, I was deeply troubled by what was going on college campuses last year. However, I'm also deeply troubled to what is happening to universities right now, and especially seeing those universities allow their academic departments to be placed into receivership, like Columbia, close their DEI programs and advocacy programs like at Michigan, which is my alma mater, and the like. So my question is, why aren't these executive orders, these threats, being stopped in their tracks with injunctions and immediate lawsuits? And what are you and the Democrats doing to support these universities? Also, I've got my college friend group on Signal, so while you're answering my question, I'm going to turn around and take a selfie.
Yeah, listen, thank you. Listen, why is the administration going after journalism, higher education, and the legal profession? Because those are the three critical foundations of any democracy. If you can destroy the ability of the legal profession to stand up and enforce the law, if you can make journalists stand down in their criticism, and you can shame the traditional center of protest, college campuses, into eradicating that lane of protest, well, then you're in pretty good shape if you're trying to shape an autocracy in this country. What is going to happen is that these industries are going to have to hold hands, right? These industries are going to have to decide together that they are going to say no. Why is Trump successful, for instance, in the legal profession at cutting these deals? Because when one of these companies come under threat, the other law firms come in and try to pick off their clients. Well, they could solve for that problem if they all just came to an agreement that none of them were going to try to poach clients when one of them got targeted by Donald Trump. The institutes of higher education are in a similar position. If they just all said no collectively, it would be much easier to stand together. But if one of these institutions loses a whole bunch of federal funding, then they know their students and their researchers are going to go somewhere else. So solidarity is what is really important here. And so we are talking. So I have been talking to the leaders of those colleges and universities, the leaders of these law firms, to try to see if we can help midwife the kind of solidarity that is necessary. NIH funding is in trouble right now. I just don't know what to tell you. I mean, it is that we are not going to be seeing increases in research funding until we have a new Congress and a new administration. Right now, what we're trying to do is just hold the line. There are massive cuts that they are proposing that are illegal because Congress actually appropriates a certain amount of money every year for research, and they are cutting that funding without congressional consent. So right now there are cases winding their way through the courts to restore that funding. A couple of them have already been successful. So when it comes to NIH funding right now, we're going to have to trust that the courts are going to do the right thing in the end. I said those were going to be the last questions, but I'm a sucker for, I know you're right behind, but I'm a sucker for a young person in line. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, all right? So I'm not going to skip over you. If you ask your question quickly and you ask your question, and we're going to finish with the young lady, all right? What's going on with these mics?
Can you hear me now? Okay.
I can.
My name is Lynn. I'm from North Stamford. How do we overturn Citizens United?
Okay. I like that short question.
My name is Jonathan. I'm a climate activist with Extinction Rebellion. The rise in fascism all over the world is interrelated. Obscene income inequality, ecological collapse, mass extinction, food shortages, and mass migration are all a result of the same fundamental systemic flaw that allows the exploitation of planet and people by the wealthiest, and governments have failed to address it. Trump is an outcome. What, in your opinion, is the most effective way local activists can use the great American tradition of civil disobedience to disrupt this regime and its brainwashed supporters?
Okay. I don't know if it's you or your mom that I'll answer. I'm gonna do all the questions together. So I'll answer your question, but I'm gonna go to, I don't know who's, I don't know if you're asking it or you're going to ask it. Okay, great.
My name is Charlotte, and Trump
is Trump is trying to stop like the school board, and also I wanted to say that next year they said that they were going to take away free lunch for all, but I think that they should keep that policy because I don't want my friends to go hungry in school or have to be embarrassed by telling their teacher or the lunch lady.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think civil disobedience is, of course, historically one of the most important tactics that we use. And listen, it may come to the moment when we have this 5-alarm constitutional crisis that we're going to have to engage in large-scale civil disobedience. I think you have to use it strategically as a tactic. And so I think it's an important conversation for us to have. We may be in a position where we have to use it at a larger scale very soon. So let's use it in a thoughtful manner. Yes, we need to. The only thing you can do about Citizens United is a constitutional amendment or a new Supreme Court. But Democrats should be really bold in saying if we get power, we will propose a constitutional amendment to get rid of Citizens United and get private money out of politics. So I'm all for it, but we're going to have to propose a constitutional amendment. So, Charlotte, can you come up here for a second? Okay, I'm going to embarrass you for a second. So that was like the most beautiful question that I have ever heard, because what you said is that you're thinking every single day of other kids, right? Of kids who might not have it as good as you, right? And when we think about why we exist in this world, right? We exist in this world to help other people, don't you think? Yeah, to help people who are less fortunate than us. And I think why all these people are here today is because they want to live in a world where we have a government that looks out for everybody, right? That looks out for everybody, regardless of what race you are, or what religion you are, or how much money you have, that we have a government that respects everybody. And everybody in this room here is going to decide when they go home tonight, how much energy are they going to put in to trying to fight for that world? And I bet you, because of your question, because you were so bold and courageous to stand up here on behalf of the other kids that go to your school, I bet you everybody in this room is going to work a little bit harder to make that kind of world that you're asking us to believe in, right? So, Charlotte, I don't have any better way to end this town hall than to just give you a big high five. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, guys.